So firstly, this is a webinar that we're running on the future of UX design. My name is Chris Ventura. I'm the CEO of Harness Projects. And so for those of you who are joining these webinars for the first time, Harness Projects is an education provider. We teach courses in UX UI design. Now, our courses follow a unique real project learning model. So this is where our students work on live company challenges while we train them. And we pride ourselves on being one of the only providers that help students gain skills and experience as a UX designer, all in the one course. So in terms of introductions, I'm joined today by two Harness Projects mentors and industry leaders. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Andrew Doherty. Andrew is a UXer, product leader. He's been a TEDx speaker and a founder. So he has led UX and product teams, raised capital, investment capital, and worked around the world at some of the world's leading tech firms, including at Google's headquarters in Palo Alto, Amazon, and others. Welcome, Andrew. And I always like to ask, what part of the world do we find you in today?
Right now, I'm in Tokyo, in Shibuya, about 20 minutes from that famous crossing with all the people.
So thanks, Andrew. Look forward to hearing your insights today. Next, I'd like to introduce Nick Busman. Nick is a UX leader who is recently a senior UX designer at the Home Depot and has held various product design roles prior to his time there. He now works as a freelance UXer, specializing in mentorship and UX UI curriculum development. Nick has worked closely with us, in fact, to build our unique real project learning experience and has mentored multiple Harness Projects programs as well as Andrew. So welcome, Nick. It's really great to have you today with us as well.
Awesome. Great to be here.
All right. So in terms of just some housekeeping, the format for this webinar is going to be pretty fluid. We want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, but the main discussion themes for today are going to be firstly, on the current and future landscape of the UX job market that I know a lot of you are interested in hearing about. Secondly, what is AI's impact on the future of UX design? We're also going to be touching on why soft skills are more important than ever. And due to some popular requests, Nick is going to provide a very short demo of our real project learning model. So you can all have a look behind the scenes of how this learning experience works. So there's going to be time for Q&A throughout the webinar. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to ask questions, please just submit your questions there and we'll try to get to as many as possible throughout the next hour. Let's kick off with our first question. I'd like to ask the panel, just to start from the high level, what are some of the major trends that you are witnessing in the UX job market today? And Andrew, would you like to kick us off perhaps with this one?
Sure. I'm noticing that it's hard. So I get contacted a lot by students, both from Harness and students who've learned UX elsewhere or people who are junior in the market. And they reach out to me on LinkedIn and sometimes by email and just ask me what the hell is going on, because it doesn't seem like an easy market to get into at the moment. So we've seen an economic downturn, a quote unquote recession has occurred and project freezing occurring, which means that hiring freezing then follows. And for the first time in recent history, we've seen large tech companies like Google and Apple and Amazon laying off engineers. So engineers are typically the hardest candidates to recruit and the most expensive. So for them to lay off engineers means they've laid off a lot of other kinds of roles as well. And typically UX is it's a role that sits between the business and engineering. So I don't want to call it a support role to engineering, but it's certainly symbiotic in relationship with engineering. So for engineers to be turned down and have job and hiring freezing occurring, it's likely that that's also the reason why we're seeing the same in the UX market. But I will say I'm in close contact with a number of recruiters who have their finger on the pulse of a lot of these budgets and large organizations who have frozen their hires. Recruiters are, although I like to sometimes throw them under the bus, they're struggling too because they get paid when we get paid. And I have it on good authority that we should start seeing a change occurring early next year at the latest, around March, when we start to see some of these budgets get greenlit again, and projects that have been frozen will continue to go back online. The work is waiting for us to do. It's not like there's less work to do. It's just piling up. There's just a lot of stuff for us to do when we get back to work, and that makes me feel good. AI hasn't yet taken over our jobs. There's a lot of UX roles waiting for us out there in the market once these budgets come back online, which we'll start to see in the next couple of months.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Andrew. I've been sort of watching the market contract and grow over the past sort of 7 years of doing this. And there's one of the things to be aware of with UX is there is no shortage of a demand for this skill set. It's typically in a lot of the migrations that a lot of companies are making to focusing on that user experience side of things, but there are cycles, and particularly macroeconomic factors have that impact. We are pretty much on the other end now of the downturn that we saw in the last 6 to 12 months. So there is going to be insignificant growth next year. There's going to be a rehiring process from a lot of the tech firms that made some layoffs earlier this year, and me and Andrew had a chat about this the other day, and this is a cynical aspect of this where, to be honest, a lot of the tech firms were making these decisions to try and reduce some of the salary amounts that people were being paid, because it got quite off the boil in terms of what is typically expected for even a junior to midway to senior UXer. So some of the salaries will come down, but the number of roles will increase. That's definitely one of the things that we're seeing. Is that sort of something that you guys have seen and noticed?
I don't have particular, I guess I haven't seen that as much in terms of salaries going down. This is the United States perspective of like what I'm seeing when I'm looking through the job market is going to be maybe regionally different as well. I don't want to take over that question. I wanted to bounce off one of the things that Andrew said. So do you want me to come back to what I was going to say?
Go ahead. Yeah, I'd like to.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say to kind of contrast with everything Andrew said, I think is right on the money. I think what the reaction to that then needs to be is you have these large pools of candidates. You have like 200 to 300 people all vying for the same like entry-level position. And the reaction to that as somebody who's a prospect isn't to, just blast off as many applications as you can. It's to tailor your narrative as a designer and to directly connect your experience through something like Harness projects, right, back to the job application. And because on the other side, there's somebody scanning through 200 to 300 applications, and they're trying to make an educated decision about whether or not you're the right fit. And the easier you make that job for the reader, the more likely you are to move through those rounds, right? So it's not just like having generic cover letters or like having like generic kind of bullet points, like being very descriptive about what you did and why you did it, and how it pertains. You're literally tailoring that application to that job because of that constriction that we're seeing on that market level.
And if I could add, there's a question that I think somebody asked about, well, is it worth it? What about AI? We're going to get into that today in quite a bit of detail. So Chandler, if we don't answer your question on that right now, we will, because it's a question we really want to cover. But if I could add to that, what I've seen is that in the history of UX, it began as a bit of a boom. There was a lot of roles that were created very quickly with people who were business analysts just simply changing their job title, having done no additional training or learning with regards to what the role actually needed. And I recall a large consulting firm, one of the big five, brought 40 BAs into a room and then told them all, congratulations, you're all UXers today. Please update your LinkedIn. We've just now built a UX team inside of our organization, and we're going to sell you for more money when we put you over to the clients because UXers are worth more. So there was a huge boom, and there was a lot of people entering the market with less training and less skills than what you might see students coming out of one of these types of project-oriented coursework curriculums entering a job. And then what I hear as a hiring manager is, we need a UXer. No, we need a real one, not one of those ones who just puts the name there and can do a wireframe on a whiteboard. We want the real deal. So yes, there are jobs, but what you're seeing is that there's a old wood, or there's like an overturning that's occurring, where there's a lot of firings, there's a lot of people, a lot of projects turning down, and it gives the organizations, whether that's good or bad, gives them the opportunity to be more selective about how they rebuild their teams. And that's where this comes in, getting project experience and being able to cater your story around what you do to the need of that new world where this business is now rebuilding a team that does require a UXer, and the job is not going away to AI just yet. We'll cover that today.
Yeah, we'll definitely go into the AI in a bit more depth, but I just want to double click on that, the advice you guys have for people, who are looking to get into UX for the first time, who are planning that career change over the next, say, 6 to 12 months in particular. What would be sort of your top 3 bits of advice that you'd share with them?
Go for it, Nick.
Yeah, I have 2, and I'll probably stumble onto the third one, which is number 1 is summarize. That's something that I have gone through. I've recently been revisiting my portfolio, and in that I go on and on and on. I have extensively and painstakingly wrote out everything I did in chronological order of a case study. And then, I realized, like, even I go to my students and I show them my portfolio, for example, as a reference for them, and they go like, well, this is really long. How is somebody supposed to read all this? And I was like, good point. No, we should have summaries at the top of our case studies out of our portfolios that summarize, like, this is basically what I did for this project. These are the high level outcomes that are going to happen when you get to the end of this project. That's kind of a teaser for when you actually make it through the end result. So in addition to those summaries, you have headlines and subheaders. Make sure that you organize that, because people are looking for those key terms when they're scanning through your portfolio, is they're going to want to see, okay, here's my discovery, here's some research I did, user interviews, prototyping, so on and so forth, right? If they can't go 100 miles per hour past your portfolio, they're going to throw it in the trash, right? They're going to, like, not look at it, and because they have another 199 others to look at. If you're not summarizing, you're not using that information architecture or typography or whatever you want to call it to help lay out your content, people are going to move quickly past your portfolio looking for the next one that fulfills the job requirements, right? Then the third thing would be that, again, to resurface that, is tailoring it. Tailoring your application to be very specific and say, hey, maybe at Harness you have a nonprofit organization that you've worked with, and one of the job applications that you find is for a nonprofit organization. Connect those two together. Show that to the hiring manager, whoever is looking at your portfolio and looking at your resume, and say, hey, I have experience working with these types of users, with these types of problems. You should take a look at that and dig a little deeper. And then that will cause someone pause and say, okay, maybe that's worthwhile checking into, versus the mountain of irrelevant or underqualified or even sometimes overqualified applicants in that large pool.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I think the people on this call today probably fit into a couple of buckets. There's people who are looking to get into UX who've got no project experience and are just getting started, and they're just happy browsing at this stage. Then there are people who have project experience and are wanting to find out what's going on, how to upskill, and then possibly get a more senior job or a more appropriate job or more exciting job. And then there are people who are UXers right now, who have either done training or want to do more, and they're just also happy browsing. So I want to direct my answer to the 3 categories as quickly as I can. For the first group, if you have no project experience and you've done some sort of online course, you're going to struggle to get that, to cut through the pile of resumes, because as a hiring manager, the first thing we're looking for is just that you've applied your skills to a real world situation, and that you have used what you know. You might know it, but you've used what you know on the job. live fire exercise. You have dealt with engineers, you have dealt with grumpy business people, you have interviewed customers and understood what the full gambit of the role requires. So project experience gets you that. And interestingly, this impression that you need to have 15 projects to get a job is not true. I got my job at Google in a senior role, having only demonstrated 2 projects to them. Now, I'd had more, but they only needed to see 2. And I picked 2 neat bookends to show them my skills begin here and they end here. So 2 or 3 projects is actually quite a lot, especially if they're contemporary, like they've happened in the last 5 years. So yeah, this idea that a hiring manager needs you to have a 20-year-long resume with project experience might actually get you into trouble, because they'll be thinking, why do you want to work for us? If you've got all this experience, why go somewhere fancier than us? And there's a little bit of that happens. But this sweet spot at the beginning is actually a really exciting moment, because those 2 projects are all you need to actually get whatever job you want, provided that you tailor your CV and your application appropriately. And then for those who have a UX job already and who are wanting to get more project experience, that's where I would start to say we're going to look at talking about AI a bit today, and making sure that you at least have the right buzzwords, that you understand what they mean, that you don't sound silly when you try to use them in a conversation, that you know where your skills begin and end in that ecosystem of AI, and that you know how to speak about it with authority without lying in an interview setting, so that you can say, I know this, but I don't know that, but here's how I would proceed if I was to use this in my project. And I just want to add, somebody asked a question here, what is the difference between a product designer and a UXer? Okay, so to answer that, sometimes there's no difference. It could just be that the hiring manager wants to build a product team, that they call it. It could also be that the hiring manager is someone like me and doesn't like using the word user because it's gotten a bit yucky, and because it sort of implies that we're using them and that they're kind of addicted to our products and we're kind of harvesting them. So user is a word that you're starting to see less and less of. Customer, you see more and more of, so customer experience designer. But for some reason, the acronym UX has stuck, even though in daily life on the job, you probably will hear people refer to your job as a customer experience designer. A product designer is a little bit more towards product management area, where you're coming up with new products that have not existed before. So it's harder to do UX testing and research on your product because it's not been built yet. So a product designer might be somebody who works very closely with a product or project team to build something brand new, for a big company or medium company or a startup. And your job is a bit of a hybrid role, where you are certainly worried about all of the UX aspects of your product, but you might be even getting into a little bit more of the graphics, the visuals, the UI, and possibly some 3D animation to try to sell it, going into Blender and helping your product manager or your business decision maker greenlight the project to go live. And a product designer is a little bit more in that production side of things, and the UXer is a little bit more in the research and customer understanding and analytics and that side of things. And I've seen roles where they've used one term and they want both, or roles where they've used one term and they actually want the other one. So it's probably a good idea, if you're unsure, to call yourself a customer experience designer who works with products, and then you're covering both.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, you just generally need to apply for both those types of roles, especially for those you getting into this for the first time. So many companies have different interpretations of how they describe this craft. And it's, for all sorts of reasons, but ultimately, in the interviews, when you get a chance to actually really understand what the role's about, and if it's a role that aligns with what you want to do. But for those of you getting in for the first time, it's just worth applying for all of them. So great, thanks for that live question, anonymous. We have another question: what kind of approach can people use to find new projects to work on, granted that they're new to the UX design world?
I'd love to take a stab at that and say, this kind of bounces off, I think, the earlier conversations with Andrew, where he was talking about what do you do if you have no real world project experience, right? I'm going to assume some of the people in the audience even have like a Google certificate, a UX certificate. And I think one of the key things that I see from those students, like I have people come to me and they say, hey, I did this certificate and I'm not getting any hits. I'm not getting any interviews. And then when you take a look at those portfolios and you kind of take a look under the hood, you see things like, okay, I think this is literally from the Google cert, is like, hey, here's an app to help children eat vegetables. And the reality is that we live in a world where it's not something that people hire for, right? We don't build apps to help people, to help children eat vegetables, right? We solve real problems where there's an actual, like, is it about getting to a sale? Is it about saving money? Is it about reducing the effort? And for something like, think about all the hard things you have to do in life in regards to keeping on top of like insurance or buying a car, like a complicated problem that is really daunting from the outside, and try to make those things easier. Or even yourself as a user, right? That's what I would recommend, is take a look at the apps that you use from your own perspective, websites, mobile applications, desktop applications, and say, how is this thing not meeting my needs? Or what would I do if I were to try to remix this in a certain way? I did that back when I was in university. I was this graphic design student, and I didn't have a dishwasher. And I would listen to national radio on my phone, and that app did not have a way for me to queue up multiple shows or radio talk shows. And I had to constantly dry my hands, hit the skip button, go back to washing dishes, and over and over and over again. And I sat down and I designed a solution for, hey, this is what this app would look like on a tablet. This is what it would look like if you added radio shows to a queue and then saw a playlist and could curate that playlist and got recommendations, and it told you why it's playing that to your recommendations. And that project is actually what kind of sprung me from web design into UX. That was how I got my first UX contract gig. Was, hey, I saw your project here. They name dropped it specifically, and they're like, oh, this is really cool. Would you like to interview for this position I have? And that was back in 2018, during that big boom that we talked about. And that's, ever since then, that's kind of catapulted me into where I am today, because I looked at a real problem and I actually got to meet one of the designers at that organization, NPR. I met her and she said, oh yeah, we actually found out that there are people like you. There are passive listeners, there are super active listeners, and then there are people like you in the middle, which we really hadn't accounted for. Some people really just like recommendations, it auto plays. Other people don't care. And then there's people like you where you pick up and start and stop sometimes. And that was really eye-opening to me, to hear this designer who'd been working in the field for years say, hey, what you discovered was valid, even though it was your own personal experience, it's valid. So talk to your friends, family, neighbors, peers about, interview them on things that you can solve for, right? Take an app and figure out, is this commonly used? Don't say like, I'm going to create an app for celebrities. Well, how are you going to get access to all the celebrities to talk to them, right? And to get their perspectives on user insights and user needs, right? Talk to people that use things that are commonly available.
Thanks, Nick. Andrew, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think project experience is hard to get. When I got started, there was no way for me to even pay or learn UX. I had to fake it. So I registered fake domain names and made a bunch of fake businesses, and I made fake websites for those businesses and coded them myself. That's a bit much, and probably something now, I think, that wouldn't actually get you the job, because they would be like, are you a liar? Did you make this shit up? Which I would have to reply, yeah, I did, but I was desperate. You don't need to be desperate anymore. There are training and learning organizations like Harness that specifically key in project experience with a real world client on a real project as the core foundation of the whole experience. Now, I've been approached by a number of learning platforms to teach UX, and my first question is it like Harness where they're going to work on a real project? If the answer is no, then I'm probably not going to bother, because they can learn that stuff somewhere else. But what they can't get somewhere else, what students can't get easily, is access to real clients before they've got the job. So you're sort of simulating that you're a UXer, you're interviewing the client, you're meeting with them, you're doing the real work on the real project, and there are real outcomes of that work before you've ever had to apply for the job. And it's sort of chicken and egg shortcut, which is maybe why it's so popular. So for me, when I find out that applicants have applied with no project experience, I'm thinking, oh, they can get it. They just haven't tried hard enough, or aren't willing to do it yet, or can't do it yet. But you can now, and I recommend looking into Harness's product offering, because there are projects that you can work on right now. And if I can just add, while this question came up, somebody anonymous wrote that they've had a couple of interviews with recruiters already and not got through the process. Harness and I did a webinar series a few years ago, just before COVID kind of kicked off, where we talked about specifically all of the steps related to getting the job. I'll link that YouTube video in here for you so that you can watch it. But it's quite detailed, and it does cover how to handle rejections, how to handle the emails between you and the recruiter, and what's actually happening in the background that you might not be aware of. So I'll send that link to you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. If you can dig that out, we'll share that around. We'll also send out an email with the recording of this, and we'll include that link there. I just want to add to this question around struggling to sort of get progress in some of those interviews. Look, one of the really big aspects of being successful in the interview part of the job search phase is your soft skills. It's your ability to communicate your design, its ability to make a connection with the hiring manager and demonstrate your cultural fit and your fit for their team. This is a very difficult thing to put a finger on and say this is exactly what it should be. Everyone has their own styles. You're not going to be a great fit for every organization or every team, but there are some things you can do to ensure that you have a better chance in those sessions. One of the things that we built into our real project learning models, we try and give our students a lot of chances to speak to real clients and speak to end users, to give each other feedback in the workshops, because things like communication, collaboration, your resilience when there's a deadline and you have to meet a deadline. Our projects are pretty full on, like you have to get to the end and you've got to have something ready to show the client. These really help to hone the soft skills that enable you to be someone that's a great team member. And so it's not enough just to walk into an interview with a really pretty portfolio. You need to actually then communicate what you did, how you thought, all those sorts of aspects. And that takes practice, multiple interviews, but also putting yourself out into those uncomfortable moments to present, to communicate more widely, to be able to answer difficult questions on the fly, these sorts of things. So we'll, I'm not sure if you guys have any thoughts on soft skills and advice for people like this question.
This is a very, Chris, you called it a craft earlier, and that's exactly the same term I use. And craft being sort of it's a very social craft. This entire industry works with people who have people senior to them and then people junior to them, and learning in every which way in between. And when you have those folks who are above you, who are your manager, they might be a director, they might be your peer, like giving and receiving feedback is a huge thing that helps give you the language to communicate to not only your peers who are also fellow UXers, but also to people who are directly outside of UX, people like product people, developers, sometimes even, kind of C-suite level stakeholders who are coming in to take a look at what you're doing, and listening to the language that you use and describe the work that you're doing and the pain that you're solving for users. Like that really, really convinces people. That's how we talked about earlier. There's no shortage of work to be done. There's a lot of like pain and kind of crust out there that sits inside all these organizations. And it's all about convincing somebody, hey, this problem is actually worth solving, and convincing somebody that, hey, this is the right solution, or this will help resolve some of the pain that exists today. That is all through the art of persuasion. That's not something that I'm going to scientifically prove that this design is the right one. There's no that. This is not a science. This is not something where we can chart out what the perfect solution is. We have to convince other people of that. And again, that all comes from those soft skills, which you get by actually being in front of an audience, talking to other people, and being able to express yourself and talk about your designs.
I'm just about to add a link in the chat for our employability scorecard. This is a tool that we designed specifically to help people self-assess on not just UX skills, but soft skills as well, the ones that are really important for UX. So that's free for anyone to fill out and just get a bit of a self-benchmark on where they're at in those skills. In the program itself, we then have our mentors from industry providing their assessment, and we sort of aggregate those scores to show you how you've grown over the 6-month period. So yeah, that's something that you might want to check out.
Yeah, and we sort of look at plugging the holes so that we get you into a more well-rounded situation. So at that interview stage, what you came in with at the beginning of one of these coursework or programs, which might have been an area for growth for you, can end up becoming one of your strengths because you kind of over-rotate on it and make sure that, it's no longer a hole in your skills matrix. It's something that it's a jewel in the crown you can elevate and talk to with authority. And I just saw there was 2 other questions here. One was about if you can get your foot in the door into a consultancy, should you do that? Yes, you should. I did that. And if you're no matter what the role, go in. Just be careful because consultancies do like to box you into a specific area, and they'll be worrying about your utilization, and then you'll be, Excel girl or guy for a good year and a half, catching awful airplanes and sitting there spilling coffee on your horrible old computer clunker that weighs 4 kilograms. And it's a life. You can Google that and have a look it up. But once you're in and you've proven your value, you may be able to make the case to your leaders that you'd like to pivot over into the UX project team, if there is one. Most consultancies have them now. And then if they're willing to take the bet, you could do it. And during that time, you could also be upskilling yourself on the outside. That's the other thing that I want to just touch on is upskilling. So I've hired UXers who didn't want to advance, and outside of the job, there was almost like a strange impression that somehow, because they were doing UX on the job, it was their job to do just that, and that if they needed to get better at it or learn more, that would be the company's responsibility. Unfortunately, that's not true, because I can just open up a new rec and hire a senior person who can already do that thing. And then the junior stays the junior. If you're adding value where you are, you're going to stay where you are. They're not going to take a risk on moving you out to some other position, which you might not be good at. And then they have to take a risk there. Then they have to rehire the person that needs to replace you in the position you had. So they're taking a risk there, and it's double risk. So if they get the opportunity to just leave you where you are because you haven't proven that you can do the thing, they'll just leave you where you are and come up with excuses for several years on why you can't be promoted or go over to do that thing. So just be careful about that. And one of the silver bullets to that problem is you can say, well, look, I did it on my own. This is how much effort I went to prove to you that I can do this thing. I didn't need to ask for permission. I've done it. And now you can't say, I don't know how to do it. Here's my real world project. Here's the 3 clients that I've built these things for. And that changes the conversation dramatically from should we take a bet to this is a safe bet. And I think that might help you if you do get into a consultancy. I recall when I first got my job at Google, the new buzzword at that time was mobile first, because mobile prior to probably 2013, was niche. Although lots of people had mobile phones, the web experience on mobile or even the mobile app experience was pretty poor. So most things you needed to do were done still on desktop. And then there was a change that occurred, particularly around the time Facebook and Google realized that the majority of their next billion customers would be accessing their products via low-powered mobile devices in countries like India and Brazil and places where they couldn't afford a high-powered laptop. So it became status quo that mobile was the way to go, and then project teams pivoted to mobile first. Look where we are now. Could you imagine not using your phone to do a thing? Short of maybe stock trading, I'm pretty sure your phone can do almost all the things you would typically be able to do on a desktop. That same paradigm has been applied, and possibly with even more emphasis in the AI realm. And that's now AI first, or I don't know what it's called, but sprinkling AI dust, magic fairy dust all over your project work. And at the moment, just like mobile first, it's a little clunky. there are companies who want to check the box, and decision makers who want to get that promotion inside that company so they can say to their boss, well, we've rolled out AI here and AI there and AI that. Aren't you proud of us? But the actual implementation of those services and those systems are not good, not safe, not easy for the customer to use or understand, which creates a huge bubble of work for you to do when you get started. And I imagine, and I kind of have a good track record of getting these things right at least a couple of years ahead, that there's going to be a bit of a bubble of bad AI that needs to have a human in the loop come in and clean it up and fix it and make it user-centered again or customer-centered again, and to kind of reorient the ship towards true north, which is how do we use these amazing technologies to make the lives of human beings better, rather than just helping that senior decision maker check that box to get that promotion and say that they've rolled out an AI this and an AI that. So there is so many different parts of AI that you could verse yourself on and get experienced with. My suggestion would lead yourself towards surfaces. A surface is a screen, essentially. What is the surface that the AI that I'm interested in would typically present itself in? And can I get some project experience either dreaming up a way to embed AI in that surface in a meaningful and usable way? And can I demonstrate that to myself first? Have a practice run, try to use one of these capabilities on a product that you love and care about. And then once you've done that for yourself, you're not sharing it with anyone. You might be able to then see if you can sprinkle that into a project that you're working on through Harness Projects or one of the projects that you seek out. And then that might be helping a charity or helping a friend with their business. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to flex this muscle now and try to apply AI into my work. And that's called applied AI. And then in an interview setting, you can then say, look, I'm not an expert on AI. And if I was to tell you I was, you'd know straight away that I was making it up. But what I can tell you is I've got some applied AI experience here, here, and here. And here's what I did with it. And here are the areas that I'm not happy with, that I wished I could have done better or knew more. And here's what I would do next to try to make it even better, should I be given the time or opportunity to do so. And that makes the hiring manager think, oh, wow, that's how somebody speaks on my team. I know this person, they're a colleague of mine, and they speak truthfully, and they say, wisest is he or she who knows they know not. But this is an inevitable truth. We have to start making friends with it now. And here's how I would begin that discovery. And here's how I would do that work. So if anyone suggests that you need to become an AI expert before you can get a UX job, that's not true. And it might be a very specific job in the case that it is. So don't freak out, because to try to understand AI is like saying to someone, learn 20 new languages, please. It's very hard. Might be better to start with the language you're interested in, the surface you're interested in, and verse yourself on that, get the basics, and then start figuring out what you could do with it should you know more, and then decide, do I want to know more? And do I want to apply this to my project?
I think that keyword applied AI is really the one to really emphasize from a UX point of view, particularly at this stage of the AI lifecycle. There are so many tools out there that we can use to support our UX process, but they don't lead the UX process. They're not there yet. The UX process is still led by individuals who understand the craft, who understand the design thinking process. We have seen some of our mentors guide our students in using some of these tools like ChatGPT to help synthesize certain notes, but also to highlight where some of the pitfalls are. We've just got to be a little bit careful that we don't just copy paste and not actually apply some critical thinking over the top of what the AI bots are generating for us. So yeah, it's a tandem effort right now. And no one knows where the long-term play is going to be yet with AI. Obviously, there are a lot of sci-fi movies you can watch on that, but right now, one of the things I like to tell students who are a bit concerned about what does it mean for future jobs, and this is not just something that the UX world is thinking about. It's every knowledge worker, which is 60 to 70% of work. And so this is a much larger macro change. It's going to happen over time very gradually. What I would suggest to everyone who is in a role and deciding about a career change is you are better off taking the effort and the time to learn a craft like UX or a product or something in the digital space to be as close to this AI trend as possible, because the ones who work closely with it, who understand it well, are going to be much more sought after than those who don't, out of fear of not feeling like there's any point. So just be really clear about where you're at when you're thinking about your future planning in your career. Okay.
And if I could just add, just on the AI thing, just one last thing. I gave a talk a number of years ago talking about the exponential nature of AI. I'm a big fan of some of Ray Kurzweil's work, and you should read his books, How to Create a Mind. It's a great book. It will give you the buzzwords you need to understand what it is that they're actually doing, what this term AI actually means. But I did say back then, and I'm kind of now concerned that I was right, but also kind of happy that I was right. It's a double-edged sword, in that it's an exponential race. And if you're not running when the firing gun goes off, when the cracker happens, you will not get in the race no matter how fast you start running, because all of us have started running and we're exponentially advancing and increasing our speed. So even if you do end up running super fast, maybe even the fastest, we're still ahead of you, and your trajectory pushes us further forward. You can't ever catch us. So I would just say that when that firing cracker goes off is indeterminate. It will be this decade for sure. You want to be on the right side of the line when that happens, because you will be projected and accelerated by all those behind you who didn't get on the right side of the line. And you almost get pulled along by the inertia of it, which is what happened to me with UX. I got pulled into it because I just happened to be doing it at the right moment, at the right time. And the inertia of it kind of pulled me in. And it became very easy for me to get jobs and do this work because I had that inertia. And AI is exactly the same. You're cross-pollinating the two worlds, but it's exactly the same, which is a new technology, a new capability. You want to index towards the gain of that inertia, and the best way is to become knowledgeable now while you still have time.
One of the projects we have coming up, in fact, for our next US cohort, which starts on the 9th, so just in a few days' time, is with an organization that specifically focuses on AI integration in UX research. They're called Conote.ai. Check them out. We're going to be working on a project to really elevate the user experience of their platform. And the interesting part is that you're going to get exposure to AI integrated in a UX research service that they offer. So there's a bit of a interesting synergy there where the students are effectively the users. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's just something to be aware of if you want to get a little bit more exposure to an AI-based project. We are getting short on time, and I wanted to give everyone an opportunity, because I know there were a lot of requests for this last week, to have a bit of a closer look at our real project learning model. We'll try and answer some more questions. So even if there are questions on other themes, we'll come back to those at the end. But I want to give Nick a chance to demonstrate a little bit of what our students see in these real project experiences, to set the context for those who aren't aware of what we do. Effectively on our courses, students work on live projects from the very first day to the very last day of the course. And we integrate the learning component of UX with the practical application to the project. And we use Miro.com, which is a pretty well-known tool, well-used tool in the UX industry and others, for collaboration and interaction. So we use that as our mechanism for delivering the 3-hour workshops that happen on a weekly basis. So I'm going to hand over to Nick and let you share screen and take us through what you've got for us.
This is an example from the UX Fundamentals course here at Harness. And what we have here, the workshops are kind of divided into 2 big sections, right? There's the pre-workshop, where that's the stuff that you're going to be doing outside of class that will help you progress individually in your understanding of UX and maybe some theory, right? So if we go in here, we have some lessons that will help you get a better understanding of what's coming up next in class. Learning how to use Figma a little bit better for class. This specific task here in week 1 of fundamentals is you need to get on top of the project brief, get an understanding of what exactly the project is going to encapsulate. And from here, we have a more collaborative aspect where, hey, start thinking about how are you going to understand this brief? What sort of questions do you immediately have? You're given a document from the stakeholder, react to that and say, well, now that I've read this leads me to more questions. I want to know more about how does your guys' business model operate, or what are your key user pains, or what sort of processes are going on in the background, right? And each student goes in and thinks about those questions from their own perspective, and then they kind of come back to class and reflect on it together. The mentor leads that discussion. There's some other modules here, but I'm going to move over to the in-class workshop, where we'll have a clear agenda. Here's what you're going to be doing today for the in this case, it's a 3-hour class, as are the most days of this, here on a double diamond of the entire project kind of laid out across the discover, define, develop, and deliver phases of the project. You see that the project kicks off, you start learning about the brief, you learn more about, you actually interview the stakeholder to learn more about the problem space, more about what they know, what sort of knowledge can they extend to you to help understand where you should be going with your solution. You research more about the people and the problems within the space. You understand, you better understand those by synthesizing your insights from the research that you conduct. Roll that up into a presentation for the stakeholder where the whole group presents. Everybody's contributing to that presentation, but everyone gives their own little piece about it. From there, you conceptualize and start to concept out through sketches or very, very low wireframes, and then continue to evolve those wireframes to the next 2 to 3 weeks, get those up to a higher fidelity, maybe get those up to prototyping, do some usability testing, ultimately culminating in a presentation where you're going to talk to that stakeholder and you're going to say, this is what I've accomplished within this project timeline. And here's the rationale that I discovered, the insights I'm connecting back to my designs. And then after that presentation, you'll get some feedback from the stakeholder. And then the next week after that, you get to learn about how do you incorporate the work that you've done from these projects into your portfolio. So that's like a super high level view that we give you very early on at the start of each project. And then throughout the class, each week has its own separate modules where the mentor will lead you through and say, hey, we're going to talk about a particular topic. Here's my personal experience. Here's some questions you can ask yourself. Here's how you get involved. How do you actually articulate what this project is going to be about? That's a collaborative process. We don't just throw you to the wolves and say, oh, well, you're going to figure it out on your own, right? This isn't a isolated boot camp where you have to think about these things by yourself. You have your peers, you have your mentor, you have all these ways for you to kind of collaborate just like you would in the real world with real UX designers, with the mentor making sure that everybody stays within the boundaries of the project and making sure that you're on the right track. If you're by yourself and alone, it's kind of hard to determine whether or not you're doing the right thing. When I was first studying graphic design, I wasn't, how do I know what I'm doing the right thing? Is because I had professors. How do I know I'm doing the right thing when I'm in UX? Is because I have my seniors to me who are able to say, like, this is great, Nick, you're going in the right direction, or maybe do a little bit of less of this. And also having your peers as well, being able to see where they're going, seeing how every student reaches a different conclusion. They might be moving in the same generalized direction, but these exercises, this knowledge helps you understand, how do I take this project from 0 and then move it all the way to a deliverable? And we break that week by week down, give you clear objectives about how you're supposed to be going about this, and just kind of structure the whole experience for you going through on a learning basis. We try to prime you before, again, with the pre-week work to help you understand theory, what you need to understand before you come into class, coming into class, understanding that, and then even outside of class, scheduling time with your mentor in case there are things that are not sticking to you and you're like, hey, I heard you talk about this in class. Can you help clarify this further? Or I'm actually struggling with this approach. Can you help me? Absolutely, students have taken me up on that offer. Basically every project, there's always been a student. Does that cover a great deal, Chris, of the kind of like weekly model?
Great, Nick. Yeah, no, thanks for taking us through that. I think the one point I guess we want to emphasize here is our experience with education, particularly with UX, is the most important learning happens in the connection between the theory that you're learning and the practical application of a real world project. That real world project comes with a lot of constraints. It comes with a deadline. It comes with a shortened time frame. There's a big difference to doing your own project where there's an open-ended deadline. There is no real constraints to work within, and you can easily cheat your way through constraints by making the user do what you want them to do in your head. In a real world project, when you have a real user and a real client, if you go down a path like that, it's not going to work. You're going to have to follow the right UX framework. And there are little decision points that happen each week when we're doing the affinity mapping and we're making decisions about what insights we're going to put into what category. These little decisions are what makes for a great designer. And so I try to emphasize to students that you really should be applying as much sort of critical thinking and focus in these collaborative exercises, because that's where your experience starts to grow. You know, it's easy to come up with a pretty portfolio, but it's much harder to have one that you can talk to at that level. And that's what we're trying to deliver to our students, so they feel really confident when they come out of the course. They can stand out in job interviews. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful for those of you that wanted to know a little bit more about how the program works behind the scenes. We'll jump back to some final questions before we wrap up. Thanks for that, Nick.
I saw a question there that links into that actually a little bit about process. So the question was, what are your thoughts about the importance of storytelling in UX? Many people emphasize storytelling for portfolios. How do you strengthen this? Well, what I found in the case of when I've been interviewed and when I've conducted interviews is that you're right. The story is the most important bit, how you get the information across to me as a listener. And I would answer your question in two parts. One is the framework is the backbone of the story. So when somebody in an interview setting asks you a question, they're going to say, tell me about a time when you had to X, and then your answer needs to follow a process. But the answer also is about the UX process. So it's like, hey, here's how you tell a fairy tale. There was a wolf and there was three little whatevers, and it goes into the forest, and then one of them got eaten, and then that's the story. It's the framework. But you can change a wolf to a bear, and you can change the three little gnomes to three little people, and you can tweak the levers to make sure that the story is meaningful to the moment in time, the particular project, the person in the room who's asking you the question. But without the framework and the backbone, you sort of just flounder there for an hour, just trying to tell them all of the detail. And these people don't have time for that and actually don't care. They're just trying to get access to the storytelling part of your brain that shows them that you understand what you did in detail and that you know how to elevate up just the most important bits and get that answer across in a few minutes. It might be 3 minutes. So you could even say to them, how long do I have to answer your question? 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes? Because I'll tell you the answer depending on how much time you give me. And they'll say 5, and you'll go a little bit over. So the second part to answer this question is practice. You can't get it right first go in the room, in the interview, when you've gone through all of this work to get that far. You've managed to get through all of the processes, the screeners, the recruiters, and you're finally in an interview room and you didn't practice your answer 50 different ways. That's a huge waste. So practice. You have to record yourself on your laptop, speaking as though you were being asked the question for the first time. ChatGPT is actually really good at generating interview questions for you on the fly. When you do generate them, though, I would suggest you answer them immediately. Don't spend time thinking, because if you're doing that, you're not simulating the real world environment in the interview setting. And ask yourself some questions, record yourself giving those answers, and you will stumble and you will fall and you will keep stumbling and keep falling until you don't. And that's when you're ready to answer the question in an interview. And if it's really good, share it with your friends. Share the video with some close friends of you answering that question and ask them to critique you and say, what did I do wrong? What could I do better? Which incidentally, by the way, is the UX process. It's forcing evolution on a creative thing. Your way of answering a question is a creative storytelling thing, and you need to evolve it to make sure it's the best it can be before you present it, before you do your performance in the room. and in a way that doesn't come across as a performance. That's the last little sprinkle of spice you need to add, which is, okay, now that I've got it completely contrived, controlled, and ready to go, how do I roll it back ever so slightly so that it still sounds like a human is delivering this message, and that it's the first time I'm answering this question? And that also comes with practice, which you should absolutely do on your own by recording yourself. As narcissistic as that sounds, just don't show anyone the videos, and don't watch them until you're really happy with how you feel it went. And then you'll see that it didn't go so well. And you need to use a few more practice runs to go.
Thanks, Andrew. Nick, do you have any, from your, I mean, you've seen quite a few projects recently and students presenting. What have you learned from that storytelling aspect?
Yeah, I've led 8 different projects through Harness. I counted the other day, it was about 70+ students that I've worked with. And what I see the strongest students come out with are the ones that tell stories. That's, to me, the most convincing. And that's what I see resonate most strongly with the stakeholders, is having something that UX is so complicated so very quickly. Whenever you go into an organization, there is work that could fuel dozens of years of trying to fix problems that are happening within a company. And not all of that can be easily understood. And that was one of my pivotal growing points as a designer, was take all that complexity and really boil it down to what's the least amount you can say about the project or what you worked on, for somebody to still maintain a semblance of what that project was about and understand what your contributions were to it and how did you go about navigating that project. Is being concise over and over and over again. And that, again, goes back to that whole idea of standing out, right? How do you differentiate yourself amongst other people? Is always by having those strong communication skills, and however you develop them on a personal level, in private or in something like a project, like, those are going to work wonders for you, because managers, directors do not have time to sit down and hear you talk about the problem for an hour. They have like 15 minutes, they have 30 minutes of your time where they can really listen in, and you have their full undivided attention before they start to lose interest. So
thanks, Nick. I'm just going to answer a couple more questions before we wrap up. One was just on what standards, guidelines does Harness have for the companies that we choose to work with on the student projects? That's a great question. One of the primary things that we look for when we're seeking companies is, firstly, a brief that we feel is really going to match the framework that we've developed, match the learning requirements that we're trying to target for the students. So, you know, one of the things that we do our due diligence with is the scope of the design brief. You know, design briefs can be really large and can require many teams, many months, and sometimes a year to get through. We try and focus on discrete parts of a brief that students can get through in a 7 to 9 week project. We also look for organizations that have a strong social angle. That's just one of our own values about the types of briefs and projects we want to help companies with. So a lot of our organizational partners are social impact in mind. They might be charities, they might be not-for-profits. We definitely do projects with for-profits as well, and some really large ones from time to time, but we try and curate a mix for our students. But ultimately, if there's something that's not just a revenue generating exercise, they tend to be more challenging projects and actually require the students to think more critically about the problem. It's a lot easier to change the conversion rate of a website versus change the behaviors of someone who, you know, is in a vulnerable community, for example. It means that your user research skills are going to need to be much more advanced than if you were just doing a self project or something cookie cutter. So yeah, all of those reasons go into the types of projects that we select. And, you know, it's been, I mean, I always sort of pinch myself after doing this for nearly 7 years. We've done over 140 plus projects across every industry. And we've never run the same project twice. They are always unique. They're always current for that organization at that point in time. And many of those projects have actually gone into commercial products and made an impact. So yeah, it's a really fulfilling win-win type of arrangement that we try and find with these companies.
And if I can add, one thing that keeps coming up is that you have the permission to talk about this project at an interview setting. you have the permission from the client by virtue of the structure that Harness have set up to show your work. Many cases and many clients don't allow you to do that. So you're sort of stuck with some sort of non-disclosure agreement, or you can't go into the nuance because the client you worked for won't allow you. In this case, the projects, it's very clear to you at the finalization of your project what you can and can't talk about, and the majority of your work you can share in an interview setting, which sort of unencumbers you, which is really important.
Great. And maybe just as the final question, Chandler asked earlier, what would you suggest we should do to help people stand out for jobs? And I guess I would love to also just get everyone's thoughts on the panel about what to really keep in mind for the next 6 to 12 months if you're in the process of your UX career change.
To stand out, again, I'm going to reflect on my own portfolio here, is like I went through each and every project and I looked at what is the outcome that I actually had, what was the business impact and what was the user impact. And if you don't have an answer, that's kind of a missed opportunity, right? Whereas if you do have an answer, like, hey, I helped, maybe you can't measure it officially, right? Let's say, for example, how long does it take someone to complete this task? Like, oh, it takes 3 minutes, right? That takes a very robust analytical database or like structure basically at a company to understand metrics like that. And you don't have that luxury. So what I did in my portfolio is I said, this task is going to improve, like users will take less time and effort to complete this task. We should see an improvement in terms of people converting from A to B. Like there are less leads and there are more conversions. People are ponying up for the premium, or they're upping their subscription rate. Those are the sorts of things that you can kind of gesture at, right? Because you're going to get to those basically points where the hiring manager is going to say, what was your impact? And you go, I haven't really thought about it that much. And having that first and foremost in that kind of summary that I talked about earlier will help people pique their interest and to go deeper into your work and say, okay, well, how did this person decrease the effort or the time that a user was required to complete this task? Or how long basically does it take a company to understand its own processes? Like I helped this company understand this complex problem, and now we should be able to do these things in the future. We have more research opportunities, for example. Any way you swing it, just showing that there's more work to be done, there was some sort of improvement, you had some sort of metric that you touched, that will help you stand out against people who basically haven't thought about that at all. And they're focused on the very pretty UI design. And they're like, well, my designs are so pretty, they speak for themselves. Not the case.
Thanks, man. Andrew, last thoughts on the state of the UX industry before we wrap up?
Yeah, just quickly on the standing out, to know your customer. And I mean, what products stand out to you because those product teams knew you in advance and made something for you so that when you saw it, you would recognize yourself in the product and you would feel connected to it. The exact same thing is happening in an interview setting, and a hiring decision maker needs to see themselves in you in the way that you present your story. So know your customer. Don't go in assuming anything other than that you've done your work on who they are, what they need out of you in that moment, and UX the hell out of your own CV and your own interview process. You have these skills, so you can apply them to yourself. You are the product, and they are choosing to buy you or not. And how you talk about your features and benefits in the room in the shortest, most interesting way is exactly what we do when we're trying to sell products on the internet. And then in terms of the state of the UX market, I would just say that hold strong. AI is not coming for your job just yet. You are going to form a symbiotic relationship with AI in that it will become a big part of your workflow, but it is not yet ready to take over. It still can't give me accurate prime numbers, even when I ask it to. It's still giving me the wrong ones. It's very good at apologizing, but not very good at doing the things we actually need it to do. It's going to be some time before it's ready to take over the entire workflow of project delivery. We may get there, but I have a feeling that there's going to be humans in the loop on this one for a while. And which humans are selected to be in that loop will depend very much on this phase of your life, which is getting prepared so that when you get into this game, you know how to play it. And if you want to stay in the game and you want to play it, you can. It's just about practice, learning, and getting ready so that when you're ready, You're going to really show off what you're capable of and really put into the mind's eye of those decision makers that they're already working with you in a team on a project and they're excited about it. The only thing left to do is sign the contract.
Awesome. I think on that note, we will leave it there. Appreciate your time, Andrew and Nick. It's been great to get your insights. I hope that was helpful for everyone that wanted to attend this webinar. We will be sending out a recording before the end of the week, so keep an eye out in your inbox for that. And yeah, we're always available at info@harnessprojects.com.au if you want to have a chat, or just hit up our website at harnessprojects.com.au and fill out the contact form. We'll get in touch with you ASAP. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.